We're back on the road this April with our live show, Cocaine Cowboys. If you want to hear the story of Ireland's love affair with Colombian powder and those who made millions in the gold rush, join us in Killarney's INEC on Saturday the 13th of April. Tickets for Belfast show have sold out on ticketmaster.ie, but limited availability remains at ulsterhall.co.uk. That's ulsterhall.co.uk. It's a week now since the businessman Nathan McDonnell was refused bail in the High Court, despite an offering from his father to put up a surety of 100,000 of his life savings. He has been held in custody. And what we know is that he's been moved off the restricted regime. He's in Portlaoise prison and he's been moved to, what is it, the A4 wing, is it?
Yes, in the high security, Ireland's only high security prison.
Right.
Which is, I think... but they still have soldiers on the roof. That's down to the fact that there's paramilitaries there, I think, in a different part of the jail. And even that, I think they're down to about 10 paramilitaries now. So I'd say the lifetime or the kind of the time for the soldiers being on the roof is coming to an end. I think there was a story recently that it's going to be cut down to quite a small number. I used to be in a full company at one stage.
And I mean, that was obviously in case they landed a helicopter on the roof.
Yeah. And there was in the 70s, there was, I think, a tipper truck was driven through the front gates and all the rest. And there was all sorts of...
It's a lot of history, Portlaoise prison.
Yeah, it's 150 years old, I think, if not more. So, I mean, it would have been built by the last regime before the Free State, before the Republic of Ireland. So it's been around. I'd say there's the walls tell stories, all right, especially some of the old wing. Yeah. The A wing, where we know Mr. McDonnell is brand new.
What does this mean? And who's in it with him, or who is he sharing this with?
It's interesting, like what we know of some of the people there. I could just go quickly through the names and give you my tuppence worth on it anyway. So you have Thomas Nicky McConnell, who is awaiting trial in the Special Criminal Court for the murder of Gareth Hutch in 2016. We have Daniel Murtagh, who is serving life for dishing out a savage beating to his partner Nadine Lott, killing her. You also have Red Larry McCarthy, who was one time head of one of the most dangerous drug gangs in Limerick, who seems to have turned over a new leaf, but still managed to get 8 years for his most recent role in the attempted murder of his rival Christy Keane. And then you've Gerard Cruz that we know of as well, and he's serving 7.5 years for his part in the murder of Keane Mulready-Woods, which we know was carried out by Robbie Lawler. But he had a role in that himself, and Paul Crosby got 10 years, and it was Crosby who had lured Woods to the house where he was ultimately killed, drove him to it. So you have these sort of characters. I'm sure there's others as well that we know of.
There are a collection of individuals who have been at all levels of the criminal underworld. There is another guy called Darren Caffrey, who I believe is a man with 230 previous convictions, and he's in there for possession of drugs for sale or supply. He pleaded guilty to that. So he, is another sort of member, I suppose, of the criminal fraternity that's well used to the regimes of prisons. I mean, 230 previous convictions, you'd want to have been in and out of jail a few times with those.
I imagine you'd know the ropes fairly well at this stage. But I think what they are basically essentially people with serious connections one way or another, whether it's from being at the bottom or at the top, but that they're more or less unaligned. So they're kind of potentially, some of them are too dangerous or too much of a target to be allowed to stay in a more regular prison setting. So, I mean, the A block itself is where some of, there's other, members of the Kinnan cartel have been held on different landings. It is kind of pretty much a brand new block, and it was purposely built, I think, as being, a new high security wing. And that's what I think these guys are. So, like, you kind of, when you look at Daniel Murtagh, like, he's serving life for killing Nadine Lott, but he hasn't had a quiet time in prison. He's been involved in, various violent incidents. He himself was the victim of an attack in Mountjoy. His face was slashed open, and he was moved to the Midlands prison. And then he was moved again to the high security. But one of his links, he's a pal of Gary Thompson from Finglas. He's one of two brothers that are serving time for the attempted murder of Patsy Hutch. So you have someone like Daniel Murtagh, you'd say, okay, it's a domestic murder, yet he's friendly with, a serious gangland figure as well. So, they're kind of slightly unusual prisoners in that sense.
Is right. Do you recall exactly what happened or what he did to Nadine Lott?
Oh, look, it's one of these. Well, when I say one of these, it's a horrific case. It's become a bit of a touchstone for anti-violence campaigners. People are trying to highlight the issue of domestic violence and whether or not, men like him, whether, their record should follow them around a bit more publicly so that women who get involved with people like him are more, will have a bit of forewarning. Murtagh, he's serving life for killing his 30-year-old girlfriend, Nadine, and that happened in 2019 and in her house in Arklow. Now, she was left barely recognisable. I remember our colleague Pat O'Connell was on the story at the time on a Saturday. I was on the news desk, and the story coming through when we started hearing the details were, it was genuinely shocking. He was very much on a drugs bender, and she was doing her best to get away from him at this stage.
Did he beat her?
And there was an eyewitness talked about him making growling noises and he carried on attacking her. He was never going to get away with a murder. It was just a crazy, really extreme violence was used on her.
And a trained boxer, this guy is.
Yeah, he was just totally out of control. I mean, there's one witness said he was basically going ape on her. A guard phoned an ambulance control, informed him that she'd been beaten to a pulp. I mean, she was just like, it was grotesque what had happened. I mean, she was missing teeth. A paramedic who said when he went in, he said it would haunt him for the rest of life what he saw, and it was one of the most horrendous scenes he'd ever walked into. Another one said it was like a bulldozer had gone through her apartment and he was trying to perform CPR on her. So she suffered traumatic head. This is stuff then that came out in court. She suffered traumatic head, neck, and chest injuries. Her brain was swollen following the sustained and violent attack. And the pathologist noticed that the blunt force injuries were caused by hands, feet, and fists, but that the use of a blunt weapon could not be ruled out. So obviously his training as a boxer meant that he was able to hit probably harder and more viciously than your average Joe would have.
And they couldn't work out whether such was the force of it, whether the blunt weapon was a fist or was an actual item.
Yeah, and I mean, I think even at the time, I think we were getting the early reports that she'd been stabbed, that there was so much blood.
God,
which she wasn't. Yeah. I mean, she's 64 different injuries, but she was just essentially, beaten to death by a guy who was just, on a complete cocktail of
and who
drugs.
She was trying to move away from. She'd identified that she wanted to be living independently of him, having had a relationship with her. I think there was text messages read out during the trial where she's sort of saying to him, it's over, basically, move on. And she was trying to be as clear as she could with him, but obviously he wasn't taking the message. Of course, people working around the campaigns against domestic violence would suggest that trying to leave a partner who is violent is the most dangerous time for a woman. And obviously that proved it.
Yeah, I mean, we heard that recently with the obituaries that we were doing on Pierce McCauley, which is when he launched the attack on his wife. Whenever that was, a good few, back in 2014, was it, I think, at this stage, or 2016, something like that. Actually, not too long before this. But I mean, that was it. Yeah, it was like...
So he's obviously, Murtagh is somebody who has continued with that sort of volatile attitude, perhaps, in prison. He was himself knifed in the face. That was in Mountjoy, having got into a row with somebody.
Yeah, there was this kind of story that we did previously where he was attacked and he was moved, and it was a suggestion that it was over, let's say, the control of illegal drugs in the prison. Now, it wasn't clear whether he was stopping somebody taking control or whether he was the person trying to get in control. And it was two relatively kind of low-level characters that were behind the attack, or certainly carried it out, and that his pal Gary Thompson, despite his own sort of hardcore gangland background, was also attacked and I think beaten up in the same attack. And they would have been moved as a result. I think Thompson himself hasn't, been quietly doing his time. He's been one of those figures has ended up being moved around. He's been in Castlerea and the Midlands as well. It's often just, I suppose, it's to stop these guys setting up a a network in a prison to disrupt, their continued attempts to stay involved in gangland crime. And that's what that's about. So, I mean...
Keith Deegan, who's also in that wing, is an equally volatile, violent individual. He was an armed post office raider, and he armed himself with a tow bar, which he wrapped in a towel before he and 2 others entered a shop in Kilbarrack in North Dublin and smashed a glass screen separating the staff from customers in order to get access to the cash. He left witnesses and people in it absolutely terrified. 2 female staff officers were screaming and crawled across the broken glass in order to get away from him and others involved in that post office raid. But Gerard Cruz, who is in jail in relation to his role in the Keane Mulready-Woods murder. And obviously that child, that 17-year-old, was dismembered and his body parts were left around parts of Dublin. The murder was carried out by Robbie Lawler. Gerard Cruz was an individual who, Gerard Jed Cruz, they called him, who had, I think he pleaded guilty to his role in the murder, but he had brought Keane Mulready-Woods and another individual, Paul Crosby, to meet with Robbie Lawler at the back of a house in Drogheda that night. He was kind of one of the last to see him alive.
Yeah, Crosby and Cruz were both, they were more or less tried together for their part, aiding, someone else to carry out a serious crime. And, what had happened was that they'd been involved in sourcing a van that was used. Paul Crosby and Cruz, Crosby was involved in, or made direct contact with Keane Mulready-Woods and brought him to the house where ultimately they believe he was killed. And then Cruz was suspected then as well. Well, he wasn't suspected, he was later convicted of being involved in the aftermath, in which, there was body parts of Keane Mulready-Woods found in various places, including North Dublin and later on some, I suppose, wasteland in Drogheda. And there was, DNA was found on carrier bags that Cruz had carried. So, it was that kind of, I mean, he doesn't have a huge amount of, no, his previous to that was 2012. He was a good bit older.
Yeah.
But certainly.
He was quite apologetic, I think, as well, during his, previous to his sentencing. He actually and Paul Crosby were sort of, their trial was going, and then they both pleaded guilty to, I think Paul Crosby had initially been charged with murder, and that was dropped to a lesser offence, and they both pleaded guilty to it. And their sentence hearing was smack bang in the middle of the Regency Hotel trial of Jerry the Monk Hutch, because it was an absolutely crowded courtroom, huge amount of journalists there, and the next thing up pops the sentence hearing. At the beginning of court, sometimes they'll attend to other business. But he, as far as I can recall, did offer his sympathies, and he was certainly remorseful, I'd say, for his role in that crime. And he doesn't seem to have had a huge amount of history in organised crime, unlike Red Larry McCarthy, because he's a very familiar face in the prison system.
Yeah, I mean, Red Larry, as we've talked about him a number of times on this, and he was one time regarded as the head of the McCarthy Dundon gang and spent 10 years. He managed to miss most of the worst of the feud, doing a 10-year sentence in the UK for arms possession. And when he got out, was very much trying to get back into the swing of things by the looks of it. But he was convicted now of a relatively minor role in the attempt to kill Christy Keane, who was shot 4 times and managed to survive outside. He was turning up for his early morning workout at the University of Limerick. And McCarthy was, there was a number of people done for using a car, and again, he was a similar charge with him. It was making a car available for the people who actually carried out the shooting. Now, but during his time in prison, he again didn't do his time quietly. He was involved in, dirty protests, covering himself in excrement, blocking his sink, this kind of thing. He found himself very much isolated, that the other Limerick gangsters weren't particularly interested in backing him up anymore. So kind of attempts, I remember we did one story where he was trying to kind of, impose his position in the Midlands to sort of control whatever trade in illegal drugs there, and it kind of pretty much fell flat. And when he came out then, that was a sentence he got for, I think, beating up a guy over somebody looking for compensation for a motorbike crash, and they ended up attacking this man. and he was serving time for that at that stage. And he came out then, he went back in. He was in custody a while awaiting trial for his part in the Christy Keane attempted murder. And again, wasn't particularly well behaved, was involved in, similar kind of incidents. And eventually then he did get he did get bail and ended up in the northwest of the country, where by all accounts he has turned over a new leaf. And I think you were saying it before as well, there's immediate members of his family now who've gone on to third level education and really do look like they've managed to escape the cycle, break the cycle and move out of, I suppose, that milieu. But the fact that he's on that wing would suggest that he's got nothing to do with these old cronies, and that it sounds like it's very much a protection wing as well, as much as anything. You talk
about they put prisoners together in order for them to not relate, basically, in prison. They don't want them coming together in prison, certainly convicted criminals and those involved in gangland activity, coming together as a gang as such. So there's a kind of a mishmash of personalities and people, and presumably, they will move if that doesn't work out, if that sort of grouping doesn't work out. Do they mix a lot, when they're on the wings?
In some wings they would do, yeah. They'd have plenty of time to spend together. In other wings, such as this one, I suspect that there isn't as much free time together. That's quite possible they'll be taking their meals separately, that they wouldn't necessarily be hanging out together, playing pool together, watching TV together. There might be a number of them might be allowed. But, again, that would be probably carefully vetted. Yeah. And some of them, don't forget, we've a couple of people here who are on remand who haven't been convicted yet. So there's a different, there's a different dynamic at play, because the prison authorities have to make sure that there's no attempts, for instance, to interfere with an upcoming trial. Yeah. Which is why, obviously, phones are restricted in prison and stuff like that. And you don't want...
Obviously, a prisoner who has an upcoming trial or who has upcoming business before the court, shall we say, will be preoccupied with that. I'm sure they spend a lot of their time reading up on their case and, meeting with their solicitors and putting together their defence.
Yeah, and in the old days, or not the old days, not that long ago, they would have been able to keep their legal papers in their cell and would have been able to go through them. So, a book of evidence, unless it's redacted, is going to have a lot of names and addresses and so on. Whereas nowadays, it's far more restricted. They have to, look at these in a particular office. It's at the governor's pleasure, so to speak. But they wouldn't have access to them day and night the way they would have at one point. Just to go back on a completely different topic about access to criminal files, was that it used to be what some of the child rapists used to swap in prison and get a kick out of it, so they could read each other's victim statements. Stop. And so I think that was one of the reasons to stop to allowing them full access to their legal files. And you can make the argument that everybody deserves a chance to have to be studying their legal files, so try and put forward the best defense, and they might have a little bit more time on their hands than some of their lawyers and might actually come up with something useful. But it is restricted now. So, and obviously, even going back, the likes of Rossi Walsh and his famous reputation as being a jailhouse lawyer, and various people would have, tried different legal stunts over the year. What's his name? Your man, Desmond, who's dead now. Mark Desmond. Yeah, he was very much tried to defend himself, and I think he successfully did it over a gun in a shed. And and
you'd have plenty of time.
And I remember remembering being at that, and there was one little niche. Obviously, it's a little gem that was passed around in the prison at the time. That if you're a defendant. If a defendant is defending himself, the state prosecution at the time aren't allowed to do a final statement to the jury. And he piped up, and lo and behold, the jury didn't get a final statement, which is always the great way for the prosecution to drive the nail in.
Yes, so, and to recall, because of course they're first to go, the prosecution, with their case, and then the defence comes second. So the reminder and that sort of, I suppose, concising all those days of evidence, because a jury can get bored of a trial going on.
And putting it all together in a nice narrative, a nice, in bite size, easy explained. This is why he's guilty, and well, the way lawyers do it, but that's what's supposed to happen.
I know. If you're a journalist, I mean, the days to go to court, if you don't have the time to go every day, is the opening statements and the closing, because you pretty much get everything that has gone on in the meantime. Now, Nathan McDonnell, who is charged in connection with the discovery of €32 million worth of crystal meth at Cork Port, is facing trial, and he's before the district court at the moment, so we can't discuss details of that case, but he has applied and been refused bail. He would be in a position that he can appeal that decision, of course, and no doubt his lawyers, will try again for bail. It was on March 28th that bail application was rejected, but in the meantime, he has formally cut all ties with his business empire in Munster, and documents have shown that he's officially resigned his position as a director with Smash Burgers, and he officially resigned on March 8th. And those documents have actually been filed with the company registrations office. So his wife, Jackie O'Duffy McDonnell, has been appointed as the company director. Ballyseedy Garden Centre outside Tralee, where there was searches conducted, I don't think it has reopened for business.
No, I know our colleague Pat did a story about it, and I think it was earlier this month, wasn't it? The company informed staff and suppliers it was going to cease trading, and basically the business had been transferred to Smash Burgers, which Mr. McDonnell has now resigned from. Nothing to do from it. And but the debts to suppliers wouldn't be carried out. So I mean, basically, the company's gone bust.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, we'll leave it at that for the moment, and we'll see if he appeals that refusal of bail decision. Thank you.
Thanks, Nicola.
I'm Nicola Tallant, and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs, and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.